All right, open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. Okay, a word of preface. The message you are going to hear today is exactly the reason why we are not a 501c3 government tax exempt corporation. Because you would never hear a message like this in a 501c3 church. Some of you have probably never heard a message like this before. I want to talk to you on the topic, how Christians and conservatives are destroying our republic. I'll say it again. How Christians and conservatives are destroying our republic. The opening verse is Matthew chapter 5 and verse 13. We have dealt with this verse before, but it is the perfect springboard into the content that we are going to deliver today. Jesus said, "Ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt have lost his savour, whence shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out, and to be trodden under foot of men." Salt is the preservative of meat. It protects against putrefaction and decay. But if the salt has lost its chemical ingredient that makes it the preservation of meat, and it's no longer able to preserve meat because the chemical qualities of the salt have been lost, then the salt is good for nothing. The only thing you can do with salt that has lost its chemical saltiness is use it for gravel. And that's what they would do. Whenever the salt was no longer capable of retarding putrefaction and decay, they would take the salt, and I'm talking about in the times of Christ, and still do, they would take the salt and throw it on the walkways, and they would use it as gravel for people to walk on. That's the analogy that Jesus is using to describe those of us that are his disciples, those of us that are his people. We are the salt of the earth. But when the salt loses its saltiness, it's good for nothing, and the only thing that you can do with it is throw it under the feet of people to walk on. That relates specifically to our country, to the churches of our country, to the pastors of the churches of our country. We, in the eyes of God, and it doesn't really matter what the mainstream media thinks about it. It doesn't really matter what the intelligentsia of higher education thinks about it. It doesn't really matter what the politicians in Washington, D.C. think about it. The only real estimation and analysis that matters is God's. And God has declared that we are the salt of the earth. We are the force that retards the decay and the putrefaction of society. We are the ones that God is using to resist evil and to be that balancing, normalizing force in society that keeps the nation from completely going under the judgment of God. So when you look at it from a biblical point of view, it is absolutely wrong thinking to look to any politician or any political party to do what only we, the church, can do. We are the preserving force. We are the thing that retards the decay, the deterioration, the putrefaction of society. But when we, the disciples of the Lord, when we have lost our spiritual qualities, we have lost the retardant that is necessary to preserve decay. When we have become that inept, ineffective, and non-necessary, the only thing you can do with it is put it under the feet of men and let it be trodden on. I can't think of a better word description for tyranny than what we see here in the words of the Lord Jesus. Good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under the foot of men. That's the definition of tyranny. Tyranny trods men underfoot. Tyranny does not recognize their humanity. It does not recognize their rights under nature or God. It does not recognize their individuality, their uniqueness, their specialness as created beings in the eyes of God. Tyranny just uses them as gravel to walk on. Jesus is talking to us. He's talking to the church. He's talking to the preachers of the nation. How Christians and conservatives are destroying our republic. They are destroying our republic when they lose their saltiness. I don't care how nice they are, how much they know about the Bible, how much Greek and Hebrew they can quote. Doesn't matter how ornate their facilities, how rich their offerings, how charismatic their appeal. None of that matters a lick. If they have lost their saltiness, they are henceforth good for nothing, to be cast out and trodden under the foot of men. How are they losing their saltiness, you ask? I'm glad you asked. I just happen to have something to say about that. Here's how. Number one, some of them have lost their saltiness due to apathy and indifference. They are truly apathetic and indifferent to what is going on. Truly they are. Number two, some of them have lost their saltiness because they are materialistic, self-centered, and success-driven. I'm talking about the Joel Osteen crowd. I'm talking about these preachers across America of all denominations whose goal in life is to be successful. They do not see themselves as prophets, but as CEOs. Their institutions are not spiritual entities. They are material corporations. It's all about success. It's all about crowds. It's all about money. It's about buildings. It's about programs. It's about staff. It's about notoriety. It's about reputation. It's about popularity. They're materialistic, self-centered, success-driven, and they have lost their saltiness. Number three, some have lost their saltiness because they are cowardly servants of the state. They have taken the 501c3 nonprofit tax-exempt status. Not only have they taken it formally as a legal entity, but they've taken it as a state of mind. They've taken it as a condition of the heart. And they truly live to stay on the smiley side of the Internal Revenue Service. Truly. It's always in the back of their minds. And if they are under the slightest impression that something they might do or say may cause them to run afoul of the government or the state, they are very quick to adjust their style, their methodology, their preaching, etc., to be sure that they don't run afoul of the possibility of losing their tax-exempt status. They are truly cowardly servants of the state. Number four, some have lost their saltiness because they are so heavenly minded, they are no earthly good. Truly. You talk to some of these people, and all they want to do is spiritualize everything away. No matter what you talk about, no matter what the condition, the circumstance, they will take you back to some pious, flowery rhetoric and talk about all these spiritual things that have absolutely no bearing on anything that's going on in the world. And their super pious attitude and their super spiritual self-conceitedness has totally taken them outside of the realm of preserving the meat of society. They're so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. Number five, some are drunk on prophecy. They are drunk on prophecy. And mostly, that means the egregiously misinterpreted prophecies relating to the modern, which they would say, the modern state of Israel. They're drunk, literally, on prophecy. But I submit that those reasons are not the biggest reason on how Christians and conservatives are destroying our republic. I think every one of those has a definite part in answering our question. And I believe that those 5 areas I just mentioned cover a vast amount of the churches and pulpits of our country, but I don't think it's the biggest reason. I'm going to talk to you today about the biggest reason. The biggest reason. The biggest mistake they make in contributing to the destruction of our republic. And if you're a little bit cold, we can click the heat on just a little bit. Are you doing okay? A little bit cold? Hit it up a little bit. I kind of felt those icy stares, no pun intended. Here's the biggest reason. And I'm going to prove it to you, I think. For the most part, they have lost all objectivity and honesty. They have lost all objectivity and honesty. I want to turn to 2 passages of Scripture to illustrate what I'm saying. The first one is John chapter 8. John chapter 8. I hope you will turn. I want you to see these. John chapter 8, verse 44. Jesus spoke these words to the Pharisees. These were the enemies of Christ, the mortal enemies of Christ. Ye are of your father, the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. And that was the twofold characteristic of the Pharisees. They were murderers and they were liars. Jesus did not hold back. Jesus did not pull any punches. He was not intimidated. He was not afraid. He was not impressed with who they were, their position, their power, their wealth, their influence. He said to the Pharisees, "You are of your father, the devil." Now turn to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16 and verse 23. Matthew 16, verse 23. But he, Jesus, turned and said unto Peter. Peter was not his enemy. Peter was his friend. Peter was his disciple. Peter was the leader of the disciples. Peter, you might even could suggest, was the standout disciple among the apostolate. The first verse that we read, he was talking to the Pharisees, his enemies, evil, wicked people. But here he's talking to his best disciple, his friend. And he turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, what? Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. To his best disciple, to his friend, Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense to me. It did not matter to the Lord Jesus whether you were a wicked, evil Pharisee or whether you were his best friend and disciple. Jesus always told the pure, objective, honest truth. And for the most part, in our blessed country today, that's what we lack from the Christian and conservative communities. They are not willing to objectively and honestly tell the truth. They are constantly playing favorites. They are constantly pandering to personalities. They're not standing on the convictions of truth and principle and right. It's all about Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, friend or foe. The lack of objectivity and honesty in dealing with truth is, I believe, the number one reason why Christians and conservatives are contributing to the destruction of our country. I'm going to share some things with you today in the message that I personally witnessed that are not hearsay, but I was there, I saw them, I experienced them myself. I was there when President came to be president, Ronald Reagan, came to appoint George Herbert Walker Bush as his vice president. Mr. Reagan had gathered together in Washington, D.C., almost all of the Christian leaders in America. We were there for the purpose of giving counsel regarding Mr. Reagan's selection of vice president. We were there for about a week, maybe 10 days. And I remember well the meetings. I remember the mood of the men. I remember the convictions of their heart and how they were very much, at the beginning anyway, desirous of implementing good government and trying to bring back some of the principles of constitutional government, etc., to our country. There were several names that were bandied forth during that period, but far and away the most popular man among, I'm talking about the Christian leadership that was there, and there were thousands of us that were there at Mr. Reagan's invitation, was Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina. Jesse Helms was an anti-communist to his soul. He was pro-freedom, pro-constitution. Like him or not, one thing about Jesse Helms, the establishment never controlled him. As the meetings progressed, about 2/3 of the way through, out of nowhere, seemingly, the name George Herbert Walker Bush was heard. And I remember that, and you gotta, we're going back 1979. We didn't even know what the term neocon was, even though Richard Nixon had already put in place neoconism and globalism through Henry Kissinger and that sort. The seed was already planted, the foundation was already laid in the Nixon administration. Well, I understand it was laid a long time before that, but I'm talking about in modern memory. But we didn't know neocon, we didn't know what that was. But what we did know, almost to a man, we knew that George Herbert Walker Bush was no friend of liberty. We knew that. And when his name was first brought to our attention, it was a universal rejection. And then the private meetings started. And I watched men that I love and men that I respect. Many of these men, and I was a youngster at that time, you got to think, 30 years old or about. So I was definitely junior in the seniority factor of leadership. And I watched as the senior members of our movement, the men that all of their lives had preached, we must put principles above politics. We must put principles above politics. It's never right to do wrong in order to do right. I've heard those sermons 1,000 times. And I watched these men capitulate, compromise, and surrender those convictions on the altar of political partisanship in the name of the lesser of two evils, in the name of we have to make sure that the Republican gets elected this year, in the name of the big bad wolf is the Democrat and our temporal salvation, it lies in the Republican candidate. In the name of political partisanship, all of those principles that I had been taught, all of those principles that those men had preached for all of those years went down the drain. And I saw my friends, stand up one by one and begin to convince us as to why we had to accept George Herbert Walker Bush. That we couldn't be so uncompromising and so rigid. We had to be able to bend and compromise in order to win the election. And gradually, over a period of days, they won over the Christian leadership of America. And at the end, there was the 189 holding out at the Alamo over in the corner. And the masses swung to George H.W. Bush. And so the leaders of the Christian right stood up in front of the media at a national press conference in Washington, D.C., and announced to the world that the religious right, the Christian conservatives, the leaders of Christian America have all come to an agreement that Mr. Reagan should select George Herbert Walker Bush as his vice president. And he did. And every dirty, rotten, stinking piece of pollution that has come out of Washington, D.C. since that time has been directly related in one way or another to the selection of George H.W. Bush as Vice President of the United States under Ronald Reagan. There would be no Bill Clinton, there would be no Barack Obama, there would have been no George W. Bush, and all of the stuff that we're dealing with would not have happened without Papa Bush being put in the White House by Christians and pastors who were unable to be objectively honest. It didn't end there. I was executive director of the Moral Majority of Florida, very much a part of the national leadership team in that organization, along with the Christian. I hope you all are warm because I'm burning up in here. Holy cow. Turn it down just a little, please, mercy. I was there when George W. Bush, the son of G.H.W. Bush, became president. I well remember when Bill Clinton and Al Gore were in the White House, they drafted a piece of legislation, and I don't remember now what the name of the legislation was that they called it. But it was repudiated in the Republican Congress overwhelmingly. I remember the Christian leadership of the religious right, Christian Coalition, that would be Pat Robertson and his group, and Jerry Falwell and his Moral Majority group, and the others that were part of that, said at that point, we could never accept this piece of legislation. It's unconstitutional. It'll trample the freedoms of the American people as well as the Christians included, that this is a horrible bill. And they rallied people against it. They used their tremendous influence across the country. The citizens spoke, the congressmen heard their constituents, and they rejected the legislation overwhelmingly. Then the Republican George W. Bush, the Christian George W. Bush, is in the White House. And I know this to be a fact because I've talked to the congressmen, several congressmen, who were in both Congresses, under Clinton and then under Bush, who read the legislation. And the legislation that Bush and Cheney sent to Congress was the exact word for word legislation. The only thing that was changed was the title. And because it was a Christian Republican that proposed it, the preachers didn't oppose it. The television evangelists didn't oppose it. The Christian leadership, the religious right, didn't oppose it whatsoever. And it passed overwhelmingly by the same Congress that just a few years before had repudiated it overwhelmingly. You know what legislation that was? It was the USA Patriot Act. And that was the beginning of the slide into total appeasement and compromise. George W. Bush spent 8 years in office and was never opposed by the Christian leadership of this country. And I tell you the truth, and if you think I'm exaggerating, you're welcome to your opinion, but I know I'm right on what I'm about to say. The 8 years under G.W. Bush stole more constitutional liberties from America than the administrations of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama combined. Everything that Barack Obama did was handed to him on a silver platter by G.W. Bush. If you want to complain about what Obama did, you have to thank Bush, because he's the one that gave him all of the tools that he used for his 8 years in office. I'll never forget sitting on that panel of television. Larry King was the moderator. And the question was asked of the leaders representing all these Christian organizations in the typical Larry King style. So what is it? What is it that you men are looking for? What is it that you men want from this administration? What is it? What is it that brings you together? What are you here for? What do you want? Talk about a wonderful opportunity to tell the country the message of truth. And what do we want? We want freedom. We want religious liberty. We want constitutional government. We want honesty back in Washington, D.C. What a wonderful opportunity. You know what the spokesman of that group said in answer to Larry's question? All we want, I remember this to the day I die, I cringed. I wanted to scream. I couldn't believe my ears. He said, all we want is a seat at the table. My mind immediately thought of the prophets of Ahab. All we want is to be invited to the presidential conferences. All we want is to be recognized by the White House. All we want is to have our name as a part of the administration. All we want, and let's cut to the chase, all we want are the perks of power. All we want is a seat at the table. I wanted to vomit. I still do when I think about it. Really. That wasn't why I went there. That wasn't why I was working my tail end off, traveling all over the place, spending days and days speaking to groups, and all we want is a seat at the table. And they got their seat at the table. You know what it cost them? It cost them their honesty. It cost them their integrity. It cost them their objectivity. And ladies and gentlemen, I see the exact same thing happening with Donald Trump's election to president. I see the exact same thing happening. No matter what and how right and honest the criticism might be, the retort is, well, he's better than Hillary Clinton. Come on. Okay. The Wicked Witch of the West lost the election. She lost. It's not about campaigning anymore. It's not about words anymore. The man is president of the United States. It's all about action. It doesn't matter how corrupt Hillary was. It doesn't matter what Hillary would have done. What matters to us now is what Donald Trump does and will do. We're talking about governing now. We're not talking about campaigning. Get off the campaign. The rhetoric means nothing. The words mean nothing. The man's got a job to do. Basically, the man has got, as I see it, two things he's got to do. Number one, he's got to honor his oath that he will take in January to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. That's his job. And the second thing he's got to do is the promise that he made to the people that put him in office. He's got to drain the swamp. And I got to tell you, he's not getting off to a very good start. I want to review just some of these picks that he selected for his cabinet. Director of CIA, Congressman Mike Pompeo. This man is a major proponent of the surveillance society. He supports unlimited government spying. He believes that the government should have carte blanche to spy any way they want, as long as they want, as deeply as they want, with no interference. And any American who questions the surveillance programs of the federal government is unpatriotic. That's Congressman Mike Pompeo. He supports the indefinite detention provisions of the NDAA. He believes that as an American citizen, you can be picked up by federal forces or by troops of the United States military and carted off to some secret installation without a lawyer, without charges, without being told of your crime, no habeas corpus, no constitutional right, no Fourth Amendment. He calls whistleblower Edward Snowden a traitor who should be executed. Pompeo will take the American police state and the surveillance state to heights not yet seen. He is downright scary to anyone who believes in civil liberties. It's a horrible choice. National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn. Flynn is a rabid supporter of the global war on terror. He will expand the global war on terror as much as he can. He has totally bought into the anti-Muslim hysteria that has swept through the so-called conservative and Christian communities. As such, he will not hesitate to trample individual liberties in the name of national security. He's a horrible choice. Personal advisor, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Nobody heard of this man before November 8th. Nobody even heard his name. I never heard his name. I never heard the media talk about him in any length before the election. Of all these horrible appointments, this one might be the absolute worst of them all. His dad, Charles Kushner, an ultra-Zionist billionaire insider, I suspect is integral part of the Jewish mafia. After Trump won the election, the next edition of Forbes magazine has a picture of Jared Kushner on the front cover. It's the current edition. You can go look at it right now. A picture of Jared Kushner on the cover, and he is the featured story of this edition of Forbes magazine. The title of the article, How Jared Kushner Won Trump the White House. What? Jared Kushner won Trump the White House? That's what the article in Forbes is claiming. It won't be the last one. I expect that other major magazines around the country in the next couple of 3 months are going to be picking up the same theme, and you're going to be reading about Jared Kushner coming out of your eyeballs. The brains behind the campaign, the man who won the White House for Donald Trump. This billionaire, son of a billionaire Zionist, probably part of the Jewish mafia, is the one that gave Trump the White House. I want to quote a few paragraphs from the Forbes article. I'm quoting now. Winners will emerge shortly, but today's focus is on the biggest loser, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who has been just fired from his role leading the transition team, along with most of the people associated with Christie. I'm no fan of Chris Christie, but hear it out. The episode is being characterized as a knife fight that ends in a Stalin-esque purge. The most compelling figure in this intrigue, however, wasn't in Trump Tower. Jared Kushner was 3 blocks south, high up in his own skyscraper at, and I'll give you the address in a minute, where he oversees the family's Kushner Company's real estate empire. The speculation was well-founded given the story's Shakespearean twist. As a U.S. attorney in 2005, Christie jailed Kushner's father on tax evasion, election fraud, and witness tampering charges. Revenge theories aside, the buzz around Kushner was directional and indicative. A year ago, he had 0 experience in politics and about as much interest in it. Suddenly, he sits at its global center. Whether he plunged the dagger into Christie is less important than the fact that he easily could have. And that power comes well earned. Close quote. Now, I'm not like some of my brethren who are into all kinds of numerology, meaning about everything. But for those of you who like to associate numbers with spiritual meaning, guess what the address of Jared Kushner global headquarters address is in New York City? I'm not making it up. Read it yourself. The address is 666 Fifth Avenue. And maybe I might start becoming more interested in numerology at this point. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley's only experience in international affairs is when she eats breakfast at IHOP. She knows nothing about international politics. She was a strong critic of Donald Trump throughout the campaign. She was a strong supporter of the globalist Marco Rubio. Why was she selected ambassador to the UN? Everybody's asking. Well, the U.S. Senator from South Carolina, high-level globalist, Lindsey Graham, said this is why she was selected. Quote, "She is a strong supporter of Israel." Adding that her presence at the UN, quote, "will be assuring to all those who are concerned about the increasing hostility of the United Nations toward Israel." She's there at the pleasure of Israel. Gee, I wonder who put the bug in Donald's ear to select Nikki Haley. If it's not his Zionist son-in-law, Jared, I don't know who else it could be. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, of the famous DeVos Amway family. Quoting from Breitbart.com. President-elect Donald Trump's transition team announces the choice of Common Core and charter school supporter Betsy DeVos as U.S. Secretary of Education. Pause. Trump campaigned across America against Common Core curriculum in America's public schools. Betsy DeVos has been one of the leading proponents of Common Core forever. Back to the article. Anti-Common Core grassroots groups of parents and teachers urged Trump to abandon DeVos as his choice, citing her support for the education reform policies of pro-Common Core Jeb Bush and her influence through the Great Lakes Education Project in favor of Common Core. DeVos, whose family founded Amway, was an at-large delegate for pro-Common Core Ohio Governor John Kasich. Kasich received a grade of F at the Pulse 2016 for his support of Common Core. Frank Cannon, president of American Principles Project, said in a statement prior to the announcement of DeVos' nomination, quote, President-elect Trump rightly slammed Governor Jeb Bush for his support of Common Core on the campaign trail. Betsy DeVos would be a very Jeb-like pick. And the idea that Trump would appoint a Common Core apologist as Secretary of Education seems unlikely. Close quote. But that's exactly who he picked. 5 days ago, I told you you'd never hear a message like this in a 501c3 church. 5 days ago, on the 22nd of this month, I wrote this on my Facebook page. Folks, from this point onward, keep an eye out for how many CFR members Trump appoints. Over the past several decades, both Democrat and GOP administrations have been littered with CFR members. This is one of the biggest reasons that nothing much changes regardless of which person is elected president. That's what I wrote 5 days ago. Well, day before yesterday, Trump makes the announcement that he has appointed K.T. McFarland from Fox News as the Assistant National Security Advisor. McFarland is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She's CFR. I bet you anything she won't be the last CFR appointment. Rear Admiral Chester Ward, just to rehearse your memory, who was the Judge Advocate General of the Navy from 1956 to 1960, and a former member of the CFR who pulled out after realizing what they were all about, warned the American people about the dangers of this and similar organizations such as the Trilateral Commission. Here is what Admiral Chester Ward said. Quote, the most powerful clique in these elitist groups have one objective in common. They want to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty and the national independence of the United States. A second clique of international members in the CFR comprises the Wall Street international bankers and their key agents. Primarily, they want the world banking monopoly from whatever power ends up in the control of global government. He also said, The main purpose of the Council on Foreign Relations is promoting the disarmament of U.S. sovereignty and national independence and submergence into an all-powerful one-world government, close quote. Mr. Trump campaigned with all vigor about the evil of globalism and the importance of American sovereignty. How can he turn around and put as the Assistant National Security Advisor a woman who is part of one of the most sinister, anti-independence, pro-globalist organizations in the world as a part of his cabinet? And here are the names that Trump is said to have on his short list for Secretary of State. It's a stellar list, folks. And I hope not one of them wind up being appointed. But here's the list of the short list according to these people that say they know. Rudy Giuliani, John Bolton, David Petraeus, Mitt Romney. Trump has now backed up on his promise by saying that he will not investigate and prosecute the Clintons. Actually got on international television and said they're good people, and he didn't want to divide the country with an investigation. And I hear all these non-thinking, partisan, non-objective people right now. Well, Chuck, you don't understand. He's just playing the game. He's got to appoint these people to make friends, and he's got to say these things. Wait a minute. He wasn't playing games on the campaign trail, and the people that elected him didn't elect him to go to Washington and play games. If we would have wanted somebody that was going to play games, we could have voted for Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or any rest of those people. I submit, with all due respect, that Christians and conservatives are acting no better than Black Lives Matter or the Hollywood elite or brain-dead Democrats who support Hillary Clinton knowing she was a career criminal. What's the difference? They apologize and refuse to hold their candidates accountable for anything. And now that's what is happening on our side of the aisle. Our guy won, so hands off. No criticism. This is shaping up to be another G.W. Bush situation. Listen. When so-called patriots violate the laws of nature and the laws of God and the principles of constitutional government and are killed by police officers in self-defense, these so-called Christian patriots go mad with fury. I'll say it again. When so-called patriots violate the laws of nature and the laws of God and the principles of constitutional government and are killed by police officers in self-defense, the so-called Christian patriots go mad with fury. But where are they when young, unarmed, non-aggressive black men are shot dead by police. Where are they? State after state, example after example of rogue police officers shooting down unarmed young black men, mostly, who were not aggressive, who were no threat to anyone, no harm to anyone, shot down. Where are our patriot brothers? I write about them in my columns. I point out these atrocities all the time in my writings. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't matter whether it's white or black, whether it's radical leftist, or whether it's right-wing patriot, justice for all. Oh no, if it's one of ours, it's if one of our guys, one of our side, we can't tell the truth. We can't reason objectively. We throw honesty and reason and objectivity down the drain. When Muslim terrorists, many of whom are not even Muslims at all, but who are agent provocateurs from Saudi Arabia and Israel, posing as Muslims, murder and rape, Christian conservatives go mad with fury. All over the internet, all over Facebook. Muslims did this, Muslims did that, and they go mad with fury. But where are they? When the Zionist state of Israel murders Palestinian children, bulldozes their houses to the ground, bombs their neighborhoods, puts snipers on roofs to kill their friends and loved ones, and imprisons their parents or siblings for the slightest provocations. Where are they? Where's their sense of justice? Where's their sense of righteousness? Where's their sense of right and wrong? No objective thinking. No objective thinking. No honest thinking. It's all political partisanship. It's pandering. To liberals, Muslims can do no wrong. To conservatives, Jews can do no wrong. But to God, who has said, "Cursed be both of your houses," no objective thinking. Any religion that does not teach Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life is one of the devil's counterfeit religions, no matter what name it goes by. I am extremely saddened by many of our most popular alt-media radio talk show hosts. I'm most saddened. I have to say kudos to Michael Savage, who, looking at the people Trump has selected so far, said on his national radio show this week, "It looks like Jeb Bush won the election." Where are the other alt-media radio talk show hosts? They're pandering to Trump. They've lost their objectivity. They've lost their integrity and their honesty because their guy won. The alt media writers and columnists, ditto. The alt media websites pandering and making excuses for Donald Trump. The election is over. Hillary lost, Donald Trump won. He has a job to do. And we have a job to do. And our job is to hold him to his job. So far, the people he is picking for his cabinet are not going to drain the swamp. They are neck deep in the swamp. Last January, I stood in front of this fellowship and the national audience that follows us, and I refused to pander to law-breaking so-called patriots or to compromise the truth, to cover up and accommodate the biblically unlawful actions of these misguided patriots. And you saw the price I was willing to pay to be faithful to those principles. I have been through this before. My radio talk show began shortly after Bill Clinton's first election. During the course of his administration, I was faithful to the principles of constitutional government, etc., on my radio show every day for 2 hours a day nationwide. And I was proclaimed a hero. I was sought after by many of the national political leaders. Anytime a political leader would come into my city, their staff would call ahead and want to be sure that they got on my radio show as a guest. I was invited to I don't know how many governor's mansions. I was invited twice to the White House, had dinners with the highest ranking people in government. Could not tell you how many audiences I had with senators and congressmen. And then G.W. Bush got elected. And when G.W. Bush started doing the same unconstitutional things that I saw Bill Clinton do, I called G.W. Bush to task just like I had Bill Clinton. Right is right regardless of political party. But within 2 years, the most celebrated and successful radio talk show program in that region of the country was forced off of the air for lack of financial support. As one person told me recently, I went from hero to zero. All because I would not compromise the message to accommodate the Republican. What I'm trying to say to you is I've been through this before. And I'm too old to start compromising now. And if we are not careful, and if the Christians and conservatives who went to the polls and voted for Donald Trump on November 8th, if they are not careful, the same thing that happened with G.W. Bush could happen with Donald Trump. And it's up to us to make sure it doesn't. I'm the same man as I was on my radio show 20 years ago. And I'm the same man I was back in January. I will call it like I see it. When Donald Trump does something right, I will give him due praise. And when he does something wrong, I will call him for it. And if that is not the kind of pastor you want, Liberty Fellowship is not for you. But if our conservative and Christian leaders do not stop their politicking and their pandering, and stop telling the objective, honest, and sincere truth to even the people they voted for, this constitutional republic is not long for this earth. Jesus told enemies, "You're of your father, the devil." And he told his friend, "Get thee behind me, Satan." I call on Alex Jones to be honest and objective about Donald Trump. I call on Steve Quayle to be honest and objective about Donald Trump. I call on Bradley Dean to be honest and objective about Donald Trump. I call on Joseph Farah to be honest and objective about Donald Trump. I call on Ann Coulter to be honest and objective about Donald Trump. I call on the writers of newswithviews.com to be honest and objective about Donald Trump. And I call on Liberty Fellowship to be honest and objective about Donald Trump. If it is our fate to be buried in the swamp, at least you and I should determine to go down kicking and screaming. If we are going to die, let's die like free men and women, not like lap dogs with their tail tucked between their legs and their mouths open, begging for the scraps from Longshank's table. Let's stand for a word of prayer.